Hey friend, welcome to Ask Dr. Betters. I have a question for you. Have you subscribed yet to our video series? Have you taken the time to subscribe to these broadcasts? I pray that you will do so. Close to 10,000 people already have. And I don't want you to miss a thing. By subscribing, you can be kept informed of everything that's going on with this Ask Dr. Betters series. Here's an interesting response to a previous video that I did on angels guiding us to heaven, where I talked about the fact that no child of God goes home unescorted. That God, I believe, commissions his angels to go down into that dying body and pull that spirit out, escorting them to heaven. Someone raised a really good question. Luke 16:22 talks about, as they say, here I'll read the question, what about the parable in Luke 16:22, in which Jesus says in his own words, "So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom." Don't you think that if Jesus himself alone were carrying the beggar to Abraham's bosom, he would have said so in the parable? If Jesus says something in the parable, is it no less a true indication of what happens at death? I agree that angels accompany Jesus, and when a believer dies and is taken to heaven, and I think that it is believable that angels may be carrying believers at Jesus' instruction. I can't visualize what the believer's soul might look like at death, but it must be tangible enough to be carried by angels. Diane in North Carolina wrote that question. Well, a couple of things, Diane, I think are important to note here. First of all, this is not a parable. This is an actual story. This is a story of people with names. People were probably familiar with the rich man and familiar with Lazarus, who was begging at his gate daily. So Jesus took that story in which Lazarus, the beggar, dies. There's no indication that he had a funeral. But it does say that the rich man also died, and in hell he lifts up his eyes. Now the story goes on to describe that he lifted up his eyes in hell, the rich man, and he saw Lazarus in the bosom of Abraham. How did he get there? The same way that all of us will get there. We are escorted there by the power of Jesus' Holy Spirit. Now, I don't know whether the angels escorting him is to be taken literally or whether they were assigned the responsibility. I believe we all have guardian angels. It makes sense to me that when I die, those angels who have watched over me all of my life, prevented me from dying prematurely or being hurt prematurely, those angels probably will have some role in escorting my spirit to heaven. Now, spirit has no legs, no arms, no weight, no eyes, no ears. A spirit is the same as God is spirit because God created us in his own image and likeness, which means that God created us as spiritual beings. We have a body that the Spirit of God indwells, and that body is how we are known. But the real you, the real me, is the spirit that is inside. That's what's been created in the image and likeness of God. That's what must be born again. That is what represents Christ eternally. The spirit is taken out of the body, we call that death, and taken into the presence of God in heaven. In this particular case, the beggar was brought into the spirit of heaven, and he was welcomed there by Abraham. Abraham and the rich man then have a conversation. In fact, I preached a sermon once based on this story where I mentioned the fact that there are 8 things in this story. I'll challenge you to figure out what they are. 8 things in hell that ought to be in our churches. 8 things represented in the words of this rich man that ought to be part and parcel to how we do ministry in the church. Interesting story. It's a real story. So when it says that the angels escorted, when I'm saying that the angels escort somebody into glory, it's with Christ, obviously, with his the way in which he was taken into heaven. When he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Jesus released himself from his body, and his spirit went to be in the presence of God. That's the same way for every believer. Jesus calls us home. He says, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, listen, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Jesus said that. Those are his words. I will come again and receive you unto myself. Now, it's not inconceivable to believe that the angels will have a role in that. The angels are always ministering the justice and the mercy of God. It stands to reason that he will make some sort of a command at the moment of my death and yours, if you know Christ, where he says to them, go get my child. But when my eyes open after death, the first one I will see is Jesus. Now, this story is designed to show us that there's a great gulf between heaven and hell. The rich man is in heaven. The rich man is in hell. Lazarus is in heaven. And the Bible tells us there's a great gulf fixed between there's heaven and hell where you cannot cross over from one to the other. So there's no salvation after death. You're either in heaven or you're in hell. I believe Jesus in John 14 tells us how that's going to happen. He will come himself. Well, when Jesus comes again at the second coming, he's bringing the angels with him. They are the ones that are going to execute the judgment. So what will their role be? Well, obviously, they're going to have some role because in this particular story, they escort Lazarus into the presence of Abraham. The rich man had a funeral. It says he died. And in hell, he lifted up his eyes. Doesn't say anything about Lazarus dying. It says very simply that Lazarus was taken by the angels into the bosom of Abraham. Now, did Jesus escort him himself? Probably not, because Jesus was on the earth at that point in bodily form. But carrying this beggar to heaven doesn't mean that they put him on his shoulders like we see cheerleaders do at a football game. Doesn't mean that at all. It means that they cleared the way to bring the beggar into heaven, into the presence of Abraham, where this discussion takes place between heaven and hell, showing that the gulf cannot be crossed. Hope this helps.
Hi, my name is Melissa Weisenfels, Executive Director here at MARKINC Ministries. Thank you so very much for your continued support of this video series. Ask Dr. Betters is not meant to be a substitute for professional counseling, but instead is designed to extract biblical principles around the questions being asked. We encourage you to seek professional counseling if needed.